Poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire. And what happened when he paid her entire hospital debt will shock everyone. But it begins the night Nora Whitfield, a cash-strapped ER nurse in Cleveland, chose compassion over judgment. This poor nurse treats a beggar with steady hands and a steady heart, unaware he's a billionaire in worn boots. She cleans his knuckles, warms his palms, and defends his dignity when others look away. She is the poor nurse who treats a beggar because that's what nurses do. But he's the billionaire who sees the price list flicker above her tired eyes and notices how she counts shift minutes like bruised dollars. He leaves with a nod, but the beggar she treats, still unknown as a billionaire, will return to pay her entire hospital debt in a way that will shock everyone, turning quiet corridors into rumors and receipts into revelations. She believes in duty, he believes in tests, and both are about to collide with mercy, money, and truth. But if the poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire, why does he know her name? Why does the billionaire know the exact amount of her hospital debt? And what happened after he paid it that made everyone, from the boardroom to the break room, fall silent? Rain drummed on the ambulance bay as Nora Whitfield badged into Cleveland Mercy with a cardboard tray of coffee. 6 p.m., when the triage board added names in relentless red. Her sneakers were wet from the bus stop. Rent would clear tomorrow if she skipped groceries. She set the cups down and scanned the board. Bay 2, Nora, called Denise, the charge nurse. Walk in, fall injury. No ID. Nora snapped on gloves and pushed through the curtain. The man on the gurney could have been 40. Rain darkened his cap. His flannel smelled of diesel. His knuckles were split. He watched her, alert, counting exits. I'm Nora, she said. Let's see what the pavement did to you. He flinched at first touch, then softened. Name? Graham, he said after a beat. Graham Vale. She checked vitals and a scrape along the jaw. You slipped? Wet steps, he murmured. My fault, no alcohol. The fatigue of someone who slept near trucks. She catalogued without judgment. Airway, breathing, circulation, dignity. Let's clean these up, she said. She warmed saline wet gauze between her palms before touching the abrasions. He watched her hands with an attentiveness that made her pocket his name. Graham Vale. Vale like valley. What's the damage, nurse? He teased when she rapped a knuckle. Bill me. You're already paying with those scrapes. She lowered her voice. You don't have insurance, do you? He took a long breath. Not the kind that helps here. We'll get you a social work consult, she offered, knowing the wait list was a maze. You still have choices. He studied her badge once. Nora Whitfield. He pronounced it like he'd practiced. You always work doubles? I like to be useful. Behind it lived numbers, her mother's surgery, collections calls, hospital debt after loopholes. She had learned to live inside the math without letting it show. An alarm chirped in Bay 3. Nora finished quickly, helped Graham sit, and offered water. He cupped the paper cup. Thank you, he said, formal, almost old-fashioned. Where are you sleeping tonight? She asked. Working something out, he said. I'll manage. He slid off the gurney, shouldered a tired canvas duffel, and tipped his cap. You're good at your job, he said. Not because you're efficient, because you see people. His gaze flicked to the laminated poster of impossible numbers. Then he was gone into the rain. Nora sanitized, documented, and moved on. A teen with asthma, a contractor with a nail through a boot. A grandmother with chest pain came and went. During a lull, she found a granola bar in her locker and a final notice folded like a threat. Total balance due. She slid it back before the paper could look like defeat. Near midnight, Denise dropped into the chair beside her. You okay, Whitfield? Fine, Nora said. Just tired. Foundation's sending board people next week, Denise said. PR tour. They'll want smiles and stories. Stories, Nora echoed. The automatic door sighed. A figure in a dry jacket stepped in, hat gone, hair slicked by weather. Nora didn't place him at first. Graham, he, set his duffel down and placed a folded paper on the counter. You didn't have to come back, she said, after reading the neat thank you signed. GV, I did, he replied, eyes flicking to the poster. Some things shouldn't linger. Denise called for Nora. Another patient needed an IV. When she looked up again, Graham was gone. Toward dawn, the board slowed at last. On break, Nora phoned her younger brother Owen to check the furnace she'd financed with a credit card. He answered, whispering so his daughter wouldn't wake. You working through? Almost off, she lied. Tell Lily I'll bring pancakes Friday. She watched a janitor polish the corridor. Costs hovered in the reflection like scaffolding. She imagined them collapsing in silence just once for someone. Then an elderly man coughed and the moment dissolved. At shift's end, she stepped into a gray morning. Rain had washed the city clean. She didn't see Graham at the curb, didn't expect to. A pigeon hopped near a wet receipt, and an unreasonable hope rose anyway. By the time she reached her walk-up, caffeine left a low tremor. She tossed damp scrubs into a hamper and opened the window. The thank you note waited on her nightstand, origami neat. One small line along the bottom margin read, "You see people. Someone should see you." Nora lay back on the quilt her mother stitched during chemo. She listened to the city wake. Somewhere a truck's roll-up door slammed. Somewhere a man named Graham Vale measured a next step. The poster's numbers ticked in her head, bright and impossible. She did not know that in offices far above her bus route, other numbers had already begun to move. Morning felt strangely lighter. By Wednesday, the rumor mill rattled. A poor nurse treats a beggar. The beggar returns with questions. A stranger asks finance and charity policy in the same breath. Nora pretended not to hear, taping a splint while triage phones rang like persistent debts. The hospital debt poster still glared from the wall. All interest in small print. She charted, she smiled, she moved, but the building's pulse had changed, as if the vents whispered the name she'd learned in Bay 2. At noon, a suited woman appeared with a laminate that didn't list a department. She spoke to the desk, then to Denise, then to the billing supervisor with the reverence usually reserved for surgeons. She glanced once toward Nora, the way executives glance at exit signs. Nora pushed a lunch tray into Bay 5 and helped Mr. Phelps sign discharge papers with hands that shook less than her own. When she stepped back out, the suited woman was gone, and a white envelope lay on the counter with her name handwritten in a careful script. Inside, an itemized ledger stamped paid in full, Nora's name. Account number. The entire hospital debt that had followed her like a second shadow, erased by an invisible hand. She blinked so hard her lashes brushed paper. Denise found her on the bench by the service elevator, breathing like a marathoner at the ribbon. "You okay?" "I think someone paid my entire hospital debt," Nora whispered, the words tinny in her ears. "All of it." Denise stared, then took the paper as if it might burn. "No foundation letterhead?" "Nothing, just..." Had seen on the margin a handwriting she recognized from the thank you note. "You see people. Someone should see you." GV Denise exhaled. Bay 2. The guy with the split knuckles, the beggar. "Graham Vale," Nora said. The name heavier now, weighted with billionaire rumor and a hospital's quiet shuffle. "But why my debt?" "Why the entire hospital debt?" Before Denise could answer, the doors opened and the air cooled as if the weather itself had followed someone in. Graham stood there in a navy work jacket that looked new only because it fit. No hat, a fresh shave, the same eyes cataloging exits. Not a billionaire's entrance. But the billing office glass reflected him as if the building already knew who he was. Nora walked toward him and stopped at the line where gurney wheels scuffed the floor. "You paid my account," she said, careful to keep gratitude from sounding like accusation. "I can't accept..." "You already did," he said, voice low. "Not money. You accepted that I was human when it didn't pay you back." She held the ledger to stop her hands from shaking. "I don't understand." "I didn't want a scene," he said, eyes flicking to the poster with its impossible numbers. "But people notice ledgers disappearing. I thought that would be quieter." "Quieter?" Denise muttered from the desk. "You set off a parade." Graham's mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "Then I did that part wrong." He turned to Nora. "You look like someone who keeps receipts of kindness." She should have refused anything that smelled like charity. But the word debt had been a weight on her ribs for 2 years, and now she could inhale without scraping against it. "Thank you," she said, the 2 words insufficient. The suited woman returned with the billing supervisor in tow. "Mr. Vale," she said, and the honorific made Denise's brows climb. "The board is waiting in Conference C." Nora's brain tripped. "Mr. Vale board. You work here?" "Sometimes," he said. "Mostly I listen." "Listen as what?" He considered. "Investor," he said, silent. "I prefer the parking lot over the boardroom. People tell the truth there." Investor folded up the beggar's flannel like a costume and replaced it with something muscled by capital and law. "A poor nurse treats a beggar, unaware he's a billionaire, and what happened when he..." Paid her entire hospital debt would shock everyone, but not half as much as what the board might learn when a billionaire walked in, wearing work boots. He started down the hall, then paused. "You told me I still had choices," he said. "So do you. After my meeting, 10 minutes on the roof?" "I have a double," she said reflexively. "Bring your badge," he replied, and followed the suited woman as administrators parted like curtains. Denise leaned on the counter. "Investor? Like billionaire investor?" "Unaware he's a billionaire," Nora murmured, dizzy with the phrase that had become her life. "I treated him like any other patient." "Exactly," Denise said, proud. That's why he noticed. The rest of the shift moved like a dream you keep waking from, ordinary tasks lit by the fact that a secret had rearranged the room. Nora coached a teenager through breathing, counseled a mother who feared a fever, and nodded at security when a quarrel smoldered. She avoided the envelope, then checked it again between patients to be sure the numbers hadn't crawled back. Paid in full. Paid in full. Paid in full. At 6, Conference C opened and suits spilled laughter down the hall. Graham emerged last with the look of someone who had said less than he knew and learned more than he let on. He saw Nora and gestured toward the staff stairwell. They climbed to a rooftop service level where the city's rust and glass stretched to a winter sky. Graham rested his hands on the railing, a posture more honest than any boardroom. "I'm not here to make you owe me," he said. "I'm here because I spent a year disguised as someone the system ignores. A poor nurse treats a beggar, a guard waves me past, a receptionist doesn't look up. Patterns tell the truth." Nora waited, wind stinging her ears. "My mother worked nights in places like this," he said. No relief. She died believing hospitals were ledgers, not lifelines. He swallowed. "I made a promise with my first investment. I would buy systems that forgot her and teach them to remember." "Why me?" "Because you kept a different promise," he said. "You kept it when no one watched. What happens now?" He nodded at the skyline. "Now I decide whether I keep pretending to be invisible, and you decide whether to help me change who gets seen." By Friday, word had hardened into narrative. A poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire. The billionaire paid her entire hospital debt, and something big was coming that would shock everyone. The story ran on caffeine and conjecture, through break rooms and finance cubicles, colliding with policy, law, and business like a gurney taking corners. Nora tried to focus on vitals, but people kept studying her as if goodness were a contagious diagnosis. She wished briefly for invisibility. Then she remembered Graham's mother and the vow he'd spoken on the roof. Being seen was the point, but it carried heat. At noon, she found a memo taped beside the poster of impossible numbers, the one that had haunted every shift. "Effective immediately, Cleveland Mercy will suspend third-party collections for low-income patients and launch an internal audit of billing practices. Questions. CFO Harold Pritchard." There was a second memo below it, newer ink, fewer words. "Effective immediately. All staff are reminded to route media inquiries to administration. No exceptions. Questions. General Counsel Selena Klein, SQ." Denise whistled low. "Audit? Pritchard hates audits." Nora's chest tightened. Audits brought flashbacks of months when her mother's chemo infusions were coded as elective for the sake of a denominator. She had watched a clerk shrug while a spreadsheet decided whether pain qualified as covered. Finance, law, business, words that fed on people when no one looked. A poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire. A billionaire walks back in and the ledger blinks. She turned to find Graham at the threshold like a rumor made solid. The navy jacket again, clean and unadorned. He nodded at the memos as if he'd posted them himself, which, in a way, he probably had. "Can we talk?" he asked. 5 minutes. They slipped into an empty pediatric room lit by cartoon wallpaper and the soft beep of a sleeping monitor. Graham leaned against the counter with the practiced ease of someone who never forgets where doors are. "You were right," he said. "The parking lot tells the truth. I've spent 2 weeks here. Days in the boardroom, nights in the lobby. I've heard the words grace, charity, hardship. I've also heard EBITDA, margin, denial code, payer mix. I want both to exist, but not in a way that grinds people to chalk." "What are you changing?" she asked, feeling the tremor of a wheel turning somewhere above her pay grade. "2 things first," he said. 1. We zero out the hospital debt of any patient who qualifies, retroactive 12 months while we overhaul policy. 2. We test a patient advocacy model on night shift. You run it. Nora blinked. I'm a floor nurse. You're the point, he said, almost impatient with anything that sounded like modesty. The poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire, but you treated me like a standard human, not a donor or a potential story. I trust that more than any consultant's slide. We can call it the Whitfield Protocol. Her mouth went dry. That sounds like branding. It's a placeholder for something real, he said. You place a trained advocate between the patient and the ledger at intake. We pilot for 30 days, measure patient outcomes, readmission, billing accuracy, staff burnout. If it works, we scale. If it fails, we learn. But we try. She imagined the intake desk at midnight, a mother with a feverish toddler, an injured temp worker, a man with rain in his beard and no ID. She imagined guiding them through forms with a flashlight instead of a threat. People will hate it, she said, the ones who like the old way because it hides the choices. People already hate change, he said. We just have to decide who we're okay disappointing. The door opened without a knock. CFO Harold Pritchard filled the frame with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He wore a tie patterned like a ledger. Mr. Vale, he said. Ms. Whitfield. His glance at Nora slid by as if she were a screensaver. A word? Conference C. Graham didn't move. Say it here. Pritchard's smile held. Unorthodox. We've had questions from our revenue cycle team regarding a philanthropic exception made on behalf of a staff member. Nora felt heat crawl her neck. Philanthropic exception. That was how business named what Mercy had already done. Graham's answer was unhurried. I made a personal payment to settle a balance that should never have gone to collections. The audit will show why it did. An audit disrupts donor confidence, Pritchard said smoothly, and our payer partners. Then our donor confidence is fragile for the wrong reasons, Graham said. And our payer partners can read. General Counsel Selina Klein slid in like a paper cut. Mr. Vale, the board appreciates your passion, but rescinding collections retroactively raises contract and precedent issues. Finance, law, business, the hospital runs on enforceable terms. The hospital runs on trust, Graham said. Finance and law exist to make that trust predictable, not to replace it. Klein's gaze darted to Nora. Ms. Whitfield, were you aware Mr. Vale intended to pay your balance? I found the envelope like everyone else, Nora said, pulse high but voice steady. I didn't ask for any of this. Yet you accepted, Pritchard said, and the word accepted felt like a charge code. Graham shifted. She accepted care. I matched it. If you want to discipline someone, discipline me. Klein folded her hands. No one is being disciplined. We are documenting facts. And I'm changing them, Graham said. If that makes us adversaries, we should say it plainly. Pritchard and Klein shared a glance, a flicker of calculation. The board meets again tonight, Klein said. We'll need a written plan for your Whitfield protocol. You'll have it, Graham replied. And a list of contracts to renegotiate. He stepped past them into the hall, his presence stirring the air the way a storm does before it breaks. Pritchard followed, talking margins. Klein lingered. Ms. Whitfield, she said softly, and Nora prepared for the warning lawyers deliver with velvet. You're a nurse. Stay a nurse. The boardroom is a weather system with its own barometric pressure. Don't get caught under it. Nora thought of her mother's oblivion papered as consent, of patients who signed forms through tears. People get caught under it every day, she said. That's why we need an umbrella. Klein studied her, then left without comment. That night, Nora worked intake with a clipboard and a stubbornness that felt like oxygen. She caught a code error before it metastasized, called a translator before a sigh became a signature, and walked a temp worker through a financial assistance app while his thumb bled onto the form. Denise watched, pride tucked into her grin like a pen. At 3 a.m., Owen texted. Lily woke coughing. Clinic opens at 8. You good? Nora sent a photo of the empty waiting area and a thumbs up she didn't feel. She wanted this to matter beyond memos. Near dawn, a man in a stained hoodie stepped through the doors, shoulders hunched against a cold not entirely weather. He wavered, then slid to the floor in a controlled collapse. Nora was moving before the gurney squealed. Blood crusted his ear. His breath smelled of copper. No ID. No insurance card, no story volunteered. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said, gloving up. His eyes fluttered. "I was told to come here," he whispered. "Said to ask for the nurse. Who sees people?" Nora looked up. Graham stood in the doorway, expression tight, not a boardroom gaze, a son's memory. "This is where we start," he said, voice low enough for only her, "with the ones who would have been coded out." Sirens swelled outside. Somewhere above, in Conference C, pens were uncapping. Somewhere below, the old ledger rattled its chains. Nora pressed gauze to the man's temple and felt the moment bend toward decision. The man in the stained hoodie, later identified as Javier Melendez, bled onto the intake counter while Nora's hands moved with practiced calm. She heard the wheeze before she saw the bruise under his ribs and the laceration that tracked behind his ear like a bad decision. "Room 4, she said, and Denise was already rolling. The gurney bumped through the doorway. The monitor blinked awake. Nora's voice stayed level as she read vitals and clipped a pulse ox to a hand that twitched with cold. Javier's whisper came ragged. "Didn't come sooner because letters. Said if I stepped inside, they'd garnish. Said I owed the hospital debt more than I make in a year." His breath hitched. "But a guy outside, he said there's a nurse here who sees people." The words landed like a charge code rewritten. Nora met Graham's eyes over the rail. This was the ledger made flesh. "You're here now," she said to Javier. "No one's taking anything. Breathe with me." While a resident closed the head wound, Nora scanned his file. Prior visit, discharged AMA after a financial counseling conversation that read like a warning label. Denial code stamped where a translator should have been. She flagged it, added a note, and pressed the advocate call button the pilot had installed that afternoon. An actual person, not a voicemail tree. 5 minutes later, an advocate stood beside the bed knee to knee with Javier, talking in plain sentences about assistance without the word punishment in it. Javier's shoulders lowered a fraction. Oxygen climbed 2 points. Downstairs, Conference C pulsed like a vein. Graham went to face it. Nora stayed with Javier until the resident nodded and the advocate had a plan that didn't sound like surrender. When she stepped into the hall, her phone vibrated. Owen. Lily's cough was better. They'd made it to clinic. "Love you." A relief gusted through her, clearing space for the storm she felt in her bones. On the way to the elevator, she passed the poster of impossible numbers. Someone had taped a paper over its corner. Debt relief pilot. Eligibility posted at intake. She didn't know who had printed it. She knew whose mother had written the promise it implied. Conference C was glass and long table and the drama of controlled voices. From the corridor, Nora saw Harold Pritchard's ledger tie and Selena Klein's legal poise, saw trustees with names etched on plaques, and Graham at the far end, hands flat on the table, listening the way he'd promised more than he spoke. A slide glowed. Revenue cycle optimization, third-party collections efficacy. Pritchard's laser pointer danced. "We cannot upend contracts retroactively without violating covenants," he intoned. "The precedent exposure alone," Selena's voice cut in, low but edged. "We also cannot ignore an internal audit's preliminary findings." She clicked and the slide changed. Not a consultant deck, screenshots, emails between revenue cycle managers and an outside collections vendor, contingency fees that swelled when denials increased, scripts that steered patients out of charity eligibility with phrasing designed to intimidate. The room hummed the way a transformer does before light either fails or flares. Pritchard's smile thinned. "Context matters. This is standard industry practice. It is not standard to pay a bonus when a chemotherapy infusion is miscoded as elective," Selena said, and the word elective landed like a gavel in Nora's chest. "It is not standard to tag Spanish-only households as high risk for default and prioritize third-party contact over translation. And it is not legal to share certain patient details with a vendor under this clause." She tapped the NDA on screen. Finance, law, business exist to protect patients, not exploit their confusion. A trustee cleared his throat. What's the remedy? Graham stood, and the room shifted orientation as if North had moved to where he was. 3 steps, he said, voice carrying without volume. First, effective tonight, we terminate the contingency fee collections contracts and absorb the near-term revenue hit as the ethical cost of correction. Second, we zero out qualifying hospital debt, retroactive 12 months, through a fund seeded at $50 million from Vail Capital's Community Trust. Third, we scale the Whitfield protocol from a night shift pilot to full intake coverage within 90 days, measured by outcomes we publish quarterly. Finance will build models. Law will draft terms. Operations will train and hire, beginning with translators. I will underwrite the transition for a year while payer contracts are renegotiated to reflect reality. Care first, collections last. If my presence on this board depends on preserving the old system, remove me. Silence drew itself taut. Then a trustee who'd said little lifted a hand. You're asking us, she said slowly, to choose a different way of doing business. I'm asking you, Graham replied, to remember what business we're in. Pritchard reached for procedure. A motion then to table. Selena's eyes didn't leave Graham. I moved to adopt the plan in substance, subject to legal drafting within 72 hours. And I further moved to place the CFO on administrative leave pending full audit review. The surprise wasn't that someone moved, it was who seconded. Denise in the doorway with a mop and a witness's authority called, "Second." A laugh rippled, then turned into something like assent when a trustee said, "Second," formally. Hands rose. The majority carried. Pritchard's face broke not outwardly, but in that small way an expression cracks when it was armor all along. An hour later, the hospital gathered in the atrium. Scrub tops, lab coats, suits, porters, volunteers, even a few patients peeking over masks. Cameras from local news lined the mezzanine. Nora stood off to the side, wanting to disappear and knowing she shouldn't. Graham stepped up to a simple mic. His work jacket unremarkable, his words careful. A poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire, he began, letting the title everyone had been whispering do its work. Heads turned toward Nora, then back. What happened when he paid her entire hospital debt shocked everyone. But my mother's debt was never paid, and that shock lasted a lifetime. He spoke briefly of nights and ledgers and the promise he made with his first return. He named the fund the Patient Dignity Fund, seated and independent, audited publicly. He described the Whitfield protocol without heroics. Advocates at intake, translators on demand, eligibility that starts from trust. Then he did the one thing no one expected. I'm the beggar, he said. And Ms. Nora Whitfield treated me like a human being before she knew my last name. The shock traveled the room like current. You could hear breath collect, the low sound a crowd makes when it recognizes itself. Nora, Graham said, eyes finding her, would you say a word? Every instinct told her to refuse. She stepped forward anyway because the whole point of being seen was to use it for someone else. Her voice shook once, then steadied. Most of us don't get to choose whether we're poor or sick first, she said. We choose what to do when people show up. I did my job. Now the hospital is choosing to do its job better. Finance, law, business, and service to care, not the other way around. If you're scared to walk in because of letters, come. If you speak another language, come. We'll see you. She looked up at the mezzanine. And to the people who write the policies, come down sometimes. The parking lot tells the truth. Applause rose, not triumphant but relieved, like air returning to a room after a door opens. Selena approached Nora afterward, not with velvet warning this time, but with a card. We'll need your input on the drafts, she said. And for what it's worth, I was wrong about the weather. You brought an umbrella. By evening, the advocate sat with Javier and a steaming cup of broth. His discharge plan included follow-up he could live with and a debt balance that read 0. Denise taped a new flyer over the old poster, patient rights in fonts that didn't look like threats. In the lobby, a little girl coughed, then giggled when a volunteer offered a sticker in her language. On the roof at dusk, Cleveland spread out like a ledger rewritten in human hands. Graham leaned on the rail where his mother's absence once pressed. It will get harder before it gets easier, he said. Contracts, headlines, people who like the old penalties. Nora tucked stray hair behind her ear, pulse finally even. We'll measure what matters and publish it. We'll fix, then fix again. And when they say a poor nurse treats a beggar unaware he's a billionaire and what happened shocked everyone, we'll make sure the part that shocks them isn't charity. It's how normal this can be. He nodded and the city lights answered.